Alrighty. What is global citizenship and why is it so important? Well, before I answer that question, we first must look at what citizenship is in general. So citizenship had its humble beginnings 4,000 years ago with a small group of people that you may not know called the ancient Romans and ancient Greek. Yeah, very, very niche, I know. But they believed that citizenship was compiled of two components, which was participation in making laws and equality before the law, which are two elements which have influenced heavily on our own ideas of citizenship in Australia and most places around the world. However, in Rome, citizenship was highly dependent on social class and gender. So people who were servants or peasants or servants and slaves weren't actually considered citizens, nor were women. So we have changed a couple of things in those 4,000 years. So modern day citizenship coming back from and developing from those 4,000 years since the ancient Romans and ancient Greeks, citizenship has become associated with more democratic systems of governments and the idea of granting rights to a citizen and demanding responsibility back. So what we mean by that is the responsibilities required of a citizen can be things such as voting, jury duty, or even paying tax in Australia, and the rights we are granted from that can be things such as healthcare, free education, and even the right to own land. So citizenship at a base level is about the legal correspondence between the citizen and the government, where the citizen gains rights but also is required some responsibility, such as what we spoke about, voting and the right of owning land and gaining those sort of rights. So moving into the new age of citizenship, which is the global citizen, this has been formed from something known as globalization, which is quite a new topic that has only been happening for around the last century. And it started around the 1900s, where the first telegraph lines were created, and communications between countries and the level of communication has just skyrocketed with that invention, where people who were once not able to speak, such as the middle class and the lower classes, are now able to contact people all over the world. The telegraph line of 1901 has now been changed into what we know as the internet, and that form of communication is so broad and wide now that the idea and the information that people are getting is so global that there is not just one identity that they niche with. So the idea of only having sovereignty to a nation and only being influenced by a nation, therefore finding citizenship with that nation, has slightly changed from that overexposure to global information and the idea of increased communication with a global network. So globalization with that communication is about the shared human experience, which we can see with the internet, which we can see when we are talking on social media. However, the global citizen and the global citizenship is also highly influenced by the emergence of global governments, which has also just been formed in the past century. So the first look at these global governments first came around after World War I, where the Treaty of Versailles was being created and this League of Nations group was being created, where governments from all over the world were enforcing international laws onto specific countries and people. This kind of contradicts the idea that a nation has the legal right to tell you how to act and the laws you should be acting and following. With the emergence of the League of Nations and the Treaty of Versailles, it was almost a step back from a national level to a global level, and it from a global level. And it contradicted this idea that the nation is what gave you laws to enforce and the rights you gain from that. So after World War I, the League of Nations fizzled out, but it gave way for a new body, which we now know today as the United Nations, and the enforcement of those laws by the United Nations and the contribution of multiple countries has seen this idea that citizenship and having citizen rights is no longer about national identity. However, it is about the international forums you are with. So this idea of not having one form of governments to enforce or to give you rights really contradicts the idea of the national citizen and supports this idea of a global citizenship. So this leads us on to the third and final point, which is why global citizenship is so important and why is it growing in popularity. So like we were talking, with the growth in communication and this global governance, people's national economies are quite dependent on this communication and this exporting and importing of goods globally. So trade is heavily based on globalization, and the prosperity of someone's economy is highly dependent on globalization. From having a global citizenship, it would allow trade and economies to flourish and flow more easily, making the levels of exports more easy and imports again more easy, making this world market more accessible and lifting most nations' economies up. The influence of internet on individuals as well has seen why this global citizenship is so important, because we are getting influenced by all over the world and we are finding our own sovereignty with our own groups and niches, not necessarily with our own country or our own nations. So this idea of relating more with another group and not necessarily a nation has made this idea of global citizenship more apparent, with the idea that instead of having one nation that you find yourself to be aligned with, it is more of the global governments you find yourself aligned with and those international laws. And finally, of why global citizenship is so important is that the rate of globalization and these other factors, the economy, the influence in internet and individuals from a global scale, and the global governments, is dependent and influenced by this rate of globalization. So globalization is the factor of why this is all happening and why global citizenship is so important, because the rate of globalization is going insane, and by 2050 even, globalization will be complete. And so this idea that people have sovereign nations will be in the past, and the idea of a global citizenship will be what nations will push for to, one, lift up those economies and make trade more easy, two, have more influence in a global governments, and three, because individuals aren't identifying with their own country anymore, but with more of a group. So global citizenship is based off the legal aspect of the emergence of a new global governments, and the social and environmental factor of globalization being about the influence of the internet and how we communicate with one another in modern day, and how those aspects influence our own sovereignty and our own identification with what we view as citizenship. So global citizenship is just about the new form of citizenship that is going to be happening and more prevalent in the future, and its importance is based in the level of globalization that is happening in the moment and what comes along with that. So globalization and a global citizenship, in very simple terms, is the future of civilization and basically of citizenship. So thank you for listening, and to sum up the idea of global citizenship and its importance, I'll leave you guys with a quote from the Greek philosopher Socrates. And he said, "I am not an Athenian or a Greek. I am a citizen of the world." Thank you for listening.